Welcome to Redirect, Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, joined shortly by co-host and fellow immigration attorney Matthew Archambault. This week, we're also joined by Matt Cameron and Andrew Free, fellow immigration attorneys, to talk about a couple important issues, including the effective shutdown of pretty much all legal immigration, thanks to furloughs of thousands and thousands of workers at USCIS, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. And it seems like they're doing it on purpose. Lots of things they could have done or they could be doing to avoid that. But, here we are. Andrew Free joins us to talk about FOIA, why that's important, and ICE covering up suicide and suicide attempts at their detention facilities. Folks, if you like the show, and I know that you do, let's be honest, you can become a patron at patreon.com/redirect and help us keep everything uploaded and going. Or what else can you do? You can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. You can leave reviews at all those places and let us know what you think of the show. We appreciate all our listeners and supporters. Here's the conversation with Matt, Matthew, and Andrew. So we're still waiting for Matt, but we're now live on the YouTube. So
YouTube.
Yeah, so there's that. But what else is going on, guys? Anything else you want to talk about on the show?
No, I was thinking that recently, right, in like the past, I think since Trump has become president, we could do a show every day about something new that's awful. And we would barely ever have to talk about the same thing twice.
Yeah, that's about right.
There's actually a database that's been compiled by some advocates that nails down each policy change that's been terrible. And when you average it out, it was, at least when I saw it last, it was literally one horrible thing for every working day of the entire regime. And so,
yeah.
So you're correct, just objectively.
I think that's
make one of those pull-off calendars, the daily policy change.
Hey, Matt Cameron in the house.
Hey, what's up?
All right. So please bring the excitement level down just a touch.
Why?
Well,
it's Friday.
Sure.
The day before our nation's birthday.
Wait, is that alcohol being...
What a birthday it's going to be.
Oh, yeah. COVID-19 for everyone. Woo!
Do you guys want to talk about COVID real quick? I mean, what in the world? What in the world is my question. All right.
Yeah.
That covers it.
COVID
you're not wearing a mask like a cuck, are you?
I am one of those mask cucks. Sorry.
I bet you drive around your Prius with your mask on.
COVID is interesting because it's an extension of what we've seen in our field for the last 3 years, and just the deterioration of feeling like you have to at some point tell the truth because people are going to figure it out. And the numbers don't lie. You can't fake a disease. You can't fake a disease.
Well, now hold on. My neighbor says that the hospitals get more money for reporting COVID cases than they do for other types of cases. And so ... they're faking the numbers.
Yeah, totally.
Get some of that sweet money that they get from the government, I guess.
From shutting down the economy. That's a good plan.
And having their providers die and get sick and have to sign out. What hospitals get a lot of money for is elective procedures. What you can't do when there's a ICU shortage and they have to do all hands on deck? Elective procedures.
I'm not saying they thought this through very far. I'm just saying, I'm interested to hear how the conspiracy theories can sort of grow and thrive in the brain of a single person, even though they're all sort of contradicting each other, all the different theories. I mean,
my favorite is if you go on Twitter, and no one should, you'll get this whole segment that the coronavirus, it's all hoax. It's not that bad. It's only old people in nursing homes dying. We have to reopen the economy. And then the next tweet will be we have to shut down the border. All these Mexicans and Central Americans are coming in with COVID and they're going to kill us all. And it's
right.
And they must know that. Well, I don't know. I don't understand stupid people, so it's hard to understand their thought process. But
on the local talk radio, they Shout out to the local talk radio, by the way. I know
I'm sure they listen.
Like the only thing I talk about, but they actually suggested that because the numbers are higher amongst Hispanics locally, and that's because they're like actually doing important work in dangerous conditions and they're not being provided with the PPE that they need. But they suggested that it's because, they're Mexican. And so maybe what we need to do is drive around those neighborhoods with like a speaker, like a loudspeaker in Spanish saying like, there's a pandemic. We know you haven't heard about it because you're Mexican.
Yeah, they don't talk about that on Univision and Telemundo.
And meanwhile, these are the same assholes who are telling people they don't need to wear a mask. But anyways,
so
the blame the Mexicans thing is definitely in full force.
So it's Friday before on a holiday weekend. Has any bad immigration news dropped that I have missed for today?
For today, I don't think so. But by the time the
day is young.
I expect at like 4:00 they're going to roll out the whole like elimination of DACA again. That's my prediction.
There were some, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about this. Well, I don't see why not. There are some rumblings of that. I know.
You can't talk about rumblings, Stephen. You know that.
There's a rumbling ban.
We have a pretty strict non-rumbling talking about. If you want to break it, go ahead.
It's got to be elevated to whispers first, I think. But I don't know. Let's hear it.
All norms are broken. Go ahead, Stephen.
Are you guys applying for DACA?
No, I'm a U.S. citizen, so I'm pretty good.
We're doing it.
So have you filed them yet?
Yeah, we just got one out, and we're going to see if they take our check. I mean, worst that happens is they reject it, right? We're not charging the guy anything, so we'll just see what happens.
For a new application?
Yeah, for a new one. And as far as I can tell, the Supreme Court reset the clock back to before the Jeff Sessions announcement, right? So I don't really need USCIS to tell me that it's okay.
Yeah.
I guess some people are saying they want to wait for the mandate. Do you think that makes a difference at all? Or, I mean, well, yeah, we're actually just kind of compiling all the documents. We don't have them ready yet to send out. So, but we're getting ready to.
I'm compiling a special wait list. It's $1,000 a month. Get on the list.
And not this again.
No, yeah, just kidding.
I've had that for the past like 3 years now. So
look, there's going to be a time.
$2,500 a month because,
right.
I'm in Philadelphia, nicer town than Yakima. So it's been working out.
Okay. So anyways.
That's a joke. Bar Association.
Right. All right, guys. I wanted to talk about USCIS real quick. Well, first of all, we're joined by Andrew Free and Matt Cameron. So I wanted to talk about USCIS to start with. Now, these are the good guys, right? They're the ones that, most of the time. I called USCIS a healthy and functioning government agency, and some people are like,
well, relatively speaking.
That's the thing, pretty good most of the time. But they're the ones that process work permits and visas and certain types of visas, green cards, things like that. TPS, DACA. And
asylum.
And asylum, yeah. And it turns out they furloughed, about half of their employees? Or over half, right?
It's 2/3 of the asylum office I saw. But yeah, 13,400 people. It's a lot of people.
Yeah. And so, that's a really big deal. And luckily, if you saw 2/3 of your employees suddenly furloughed, you would have a real feel for that as an emergency, and you would try and get out there and do something about it. So Ken Cuccinelli, who's, I guess, like de facto in charge illegally. I don't really understand all that. Do you guys understand how he's in charge, but not really?
He's not even acting. He's pseudo acting.
That's all I know.
Yeah. He's not even an acting asshole. He's professional on that.
Yeah, no, he's got that down. But I don't know what his role is.
He went on to the One America News Network.
The best news network.
To plea for the future of the agency that he's sort of leading. And this is how it went.
Joining me now from Washington, D.C., Acting Deputy Secretary.
Okay.
The Department of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli. Ken, we're not there yet, but clearly these attacks on police, to me, is tantamount to an attack on Homeland Security. Little by little, if we continue to attack policing at home, at the street level, eventually it's going to creep to our national security, and our enemies are watching.
Well, certainly.
We're going to go straight down the line with that question.
Does anybody
Which
want to
enemies are those? Are those the enemies that like have been paying to kill our troops and we invited them into the G7, or the enemies that we said could set up concentration camps, or the enemies that chopped up a lawful permanent resident while they were listening to music? Which enemies is he talking about?
Those are friends, Andrew.
Oh, okay, sorry.
friends like these?
Responsibility of government at every level is public safety, federal, state, and local. And you see the abandonment of that sometimes for long periods of time, sometimes short at local and state levels. Certainly President Trump is not taking that approach. But let's break out what you said into two pieces. Actual intentional physical attacks on law enforcement for the purpose of hurting them and intimidating others.
Okay, I'm not going to listen to this. Basically, he's going on TV to talk about the cops.
No, the second part, wait, the second part, come on, Stephen. The second part may have been the applications, like fall off of applications for benefits. It may have been.
I just want to say that the implication here is that if people keep talking about how cops are bad, somebody might think that ICE is bad. And, that doesn't seem to be, maybe ONN hasn't been following Twitter very much recently.
Right. Yeah, good point.
So your point, Stephen, is USCIS has nothing to do with what they're talking about, right?
Well, it just seems like if your house is on fire and you went out into the front yard and then the neighbor came over and you were like, did you catch the game last night? There's a strong vibe of that going on here. I mean, it's just it's crazy. First of all, that there's
you're the one that set your house on fire and you're actually enjoy watching it burn, which I think is probably the most apt scenario here.
I think that's
what's so troubling about this logic, though, and the fact that it keeps getting broadcast around, is that we don't apply the same logic to cops who murder people on film, mostly black and brown people. And what he's saying is if these attacks are, on police, then it's threatening national security. What is the converse of that when police are attacking people and killing them on camera?
That's freedom.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, okay, what do you guys think? Is it the case that USCIS, a self-funded agency, so it's funded by the people who are paying for the service, that they've really just run out of money despite their best efforts? Or is it possible, I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat here, is it possible that they kind of want this to happen?
Well, they definitely want this to happen, right? And if you look at the drop in applications, that really only accounts for maybe $150 to $200 million in fees. And they're $1.2 billion, apparently, they say, in the hole. So it's not just a drop off in application fees. There is a whole host of other things. Now, it might be postage, with them sending every application back to us. That might be part of it, but that's certainly probably a small part, actually. But when you look at the increase in they're looking for fraud that almost never really exists. And also, I think they transferred money, for the military, the wall, all this stuff. But it's certainly a coordinated effort to run the agency into the ground. Because quite frankly, if on Monday, when the federal government opens back up after the federal holiday, if USCIS did not open back up, did no longer cease to exist, they would be perfectly happy. There's not one person in that administration that would be like, damn, we miss USCIS.
Well, it says a lot.
Eyes on the ball. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
The first thing to go, the first thing I heard about was the asylum office, right? That's absolutely the opposite of a priority for them. They don't want asylum cases to be processed. They've had an ongoing running gun war with asylum for the last 4 years. And I think it's pretty clear that is, that's the galaxy brain take here, right? Is that they just, instead of going to court, you can just shut the agency down. I don't know why they didn't think of that 4 years ago.
If the goal is this eliminationist ideology that's been very well documented, even when the people who are writing and shepherding these policies through were in the House and Senate as staffers, if the goal is to eliminate certain populations and make it impossible for them to really continue to grow in the United States, what better way to do that than to cut off people who are new lawful permanent residents or citizens, which they just consider chain migration? Keep in mind, these are people who don't even want birthright citizenship to exist.
Yeah.
So killing the ability to create more citizens is actually completely consistent with their ideology.
Right. And I do think if they were even a little bit concerned, maybe they would be going on TV to like mention it and not talk about the cops or whatever.
But we're doing a lot of things that are very good, including waste and fraud, tremendous waste and tremendous fraud. So we're doing
yeah. So
you tell them.
And it's too bad because, one of the common questions for an immigration attorney is, what's going on with my case? How long is it going to take based on your experience? I don't even like to give time frames, honestly, because you just never know. But if you filed 10 green cards in the last year and they all kind of took about this much time, you could give people a window and then give them a caveat. And now with the furloughs and also the shutdown from COVID, I mean, it's really impossible to say. But I mean, a fairly straightforward green card case, I mean, who knows, could take 4 or 5 years if they don't get back to normal. So
there's also the voter suppression aspect, which we just have to acknowledge, obviously, that there are thousands and thousands of pending actualization cases right now. And I understand there's an election still happening in November. So that's a lot of people that might not be able to vote. Obviously, maybe not a significant game-changing contingent, but it's still hard to miss.
Yeah, but over the
last election was decided by 78,000+ people.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And also they're looking at the long haul, right? I mean, they know, they're saying, hey, we're really towards immigrants. So even old immigrants that had traditionally voted Democrats, they're probably going to be more exercised to vote against our brand now. So not only to protect our present, but to protect the future. Yeah, they just don't. This is a hot take. So I don't think they like immigrants. So, yeah.
Wow.
It's so fascinating to me because I was really shocked to learn in the wake of the Iraqi raids when they rounded up over 1,000 people with final orders who they couldn't deport to Iraq and then lied about it to a federal court and got caught. I was shocked to learn that many people in the Kurdish community had actually voted for the guy because he promised to arm the Pesh and he promised to support autonomy. And so it was he actually won reportedly between 80 and 90% of the Kurdish vote in Nashville, which is the world's largest population of Kurds outside Kurdistan.
Wow.
And it's because, he came and he told these business people, I'm going to be good for business, I'm going to be good for your taxes, and I'm going to help and support you abroad against the terrorists. And then he sold them out because he was being exposed for the Ukraine stuff, and he let Turkey go in and murder a bunch of people. And, little micro contingents like that, which formed his coalition last time of, unlikely people, immigrants, unlikely at least from our frame, those are not going to be there this time. He has betrayed them.
I had a Muslim client who said that Trump was just bluffing on all that stuff. He kind of had to be racist, but didn't really mean it. But he was a good businessman, and so gonna be good for the country because that's how it works. And I wonder if some of those people have had their minds changed. But anyhow, yeah, USCIS. I mean, it's I do find this to be one of the sadder things that's going on, just because I don't know about you guys. My favorite time of the day is usually the mail. The mail comes, and I get to see all my 765 denials. Just kidding. No, but we get green cards, we get work permits almost every day. We get U visa approvals and all these kinds of things. And so when I say, USCIS is healthy and functioning, it's not because I'm without contention on certain decisions, but it's because, this is the agency that has essentially welcomed almost all of our clients into this country. And to see them essentially get shut down is really sad for me.
And I want to say shout out to the career people who work there. I think they're, at least around here, the people that I've met are doing it for the right reasons. This isn't ICE. This isn't CBP. These are people that want to get in there and process applications. They're not in it to screw people over for the most part. So it's extra hard to see all these furloughs. Again, there's a lot of people, good and bad, but it's a large agency. But you mentioned at the beginning, this is a business. I just want to make this very explicit for everybody listening who doesn't think about this as much as we do. I think it's 97% traditionally funded by fees since it started in 2003. That's fluctuated, obviously, but it's in the high 90s. It's never been shut down during a government shutdown just for that reason. And it's a libertarian dream, right? That's how government is supposed to work for the conservatives, right? Is you want to have something that pays for itself. I disagree with having immigrants pay for the entire immigration system, but if that's how you want it to function, then that's how it's functioning. A naturalization application in our lifetimes used to be $5. Those days are long gone because we used to see it as a public benefit, right? For people to be able to naturalize and vote. We're way past that. But it is sad that even this model, which again, I don't necessarily agree with, but that they can't even maintain this, right? They can't even keep it self-sufficient, which it was working for the most part since 2003.
Yeah. I mean, for sure that citizenship application is now over $700. Mm-hmm. And actually, the one weird thing is that just the certificate costs even more than that.
It's a nice
that is, someone came to me and they're like, oh, I never got my certificate of naturalization. Like they lost it or something. I'm like, oh, you can do a replacement. And I'm looking at the fee and I'm like, this is how much it costs. And they're like, they literally just need to print a new one. I'm like, yeah, well.
Why don't you just do a fee waiver?
Wow.
Okay, yeah. Remember those?
Oh, wait.
Remember those?
Oh, wait.
Those were awesome.
Here's Andrew. All immigrants are poor.
When they furlough all these people, what's going to happen when you walk into district court with mandamus? Like how, district court judges are going to be like, all right, adjudicate this.
I'm planning on finding out next week. We're going to figure it out.
Yeah. And people should understand, we haven't been in interviews since March, but when I would go into the local office, it was, depending on the officer, some were tidier than others, but they'd have stacks and stacks of stuff around their desk, on sort of back credenza, stacks of huge files, 5 inches thick. They had quite a little backlog going before all of this.
Yeah. I just got an RFE for a 751 that's been pending for years from the Cincinnati field office. This was, an interview that happened in Philadelphia 3-4 years ago. So they're already a little stretched.
Yeah.
In some ways, this drive is the same as it was for DACA, and it's the same as it was for other things, which is they're attempting to accomplish a goal through the regulatory state that they don't really like and don't think should exist, and so they don't truly understand it. And so what's going to happen is that all the people who were working for USCIS, who kept their mouths shut because they needed their paychecks and they needed their jobs and they needed their benefits and the stability of a job, are going to be faced with the elimination of that stability in the middle of a pandemic and a depression. And we'll see whether the people who still work at USCIS feel as beholden to this agency and to their futures when they're reviewing all these absolutely insane policies that they're being asked to implement that they know break the law.
Right. There does also seem to be a little bit, and now I know the furloughs have been a long time coming at this point, but there's a little bit of a take your ball and go home feel to this after the Supreme Court says, you guys got to do those DACAs again. And USCIS literally responds with, well, that's not a lawful order. And by the way, we're basically going to stop functioning.
Well, that's the irony, right? Is that if they did open it up for new applications, and and it's up to them. The president could adjust the rules and open it up for a whole lot more people. There's nothing holding us to the dates that we have right now. That could be a huge fundraiser if you opened it up to new applications and change the dates, and obviously extend TPS and don't have it end in January the way it's supposed to. A lot of the stuff they've done to themselves by unexpectedly cutting off their own funding.
Right.
Registry for everyone.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. I'm all for it.
Yeah. So Matt, why don't you talk about that? Because you had a nice little Twitter thread about registry and what that is. And I think a lot of people don't realize that that's a part of our fairly recent immigration history. So
yeah, well, it's also part of our ancient immigration history because it goes back to 1929. But, you have to remember that the idea of being undocumented is pretty new. It's something we created essentially, as we know it today. We created the concept of being undocumented in 1965. We certainly were concerned about it. There were some internal deportations happening before then. And I think we all know there were waves of them, especially during hard economic times. But there was not that obsession with being undocumented. And for most of American history, you didn't have to identify yourself and you didn't have to show when you came or how you came or what your status was. Obviously, when the modern visa system was formalized in 1924, there were a bunch of people who couldn't prove how they got here because nobody cared. Nobody was keeping track until even 1906 about your registration and who you were. And being a citizen back then was as easy as just going and stating your intention to becoming a citizen and then going into a courthouse a few years later and signing up. And that was it. So the system just wasn't there for handling that kind of stuff. So in 29, Congress looked around, saw there were a bunch of undocumented people in the country and said, hey, let's just make them documented, right? Which is something that we always can do because immigration status is not a tattoo. Immigration status is not your height or your eye color. It is just something that we assign you. So that's something that we can do anytime. And the registry essentially was, if you can prove you've been living here since 1921 at the time, that went back 8 years, just show us some documentation. Of course, there was a lot of fraud back then because there was no way to prove it. And you look at people like Tommy Lahren, I think it was great-grandfather, went through things like that. You can provide lots of fake paperwork. But the point is that this was updated 4 times since the time in 29, most recently in 1986, when they left it at the number it's at right now, which is January 1st, 1972. If you can prove right now, as of today, that you were here in January 1st, 1972, and you otherwise qualify for residency, you can just file a residency application. And it's that easy. And all we have to do is update that number. So that was my proposal this week. And that's something I've been thinking about for a long time, is just change that date from January 1st, 1972. I was proposing 2012 because 8 years is the shortest look back period that we've had in the registry. But certainly, obviously, if it were up to me, if it were up to all of us, I think we'd have it be tomorrow or today or whatever. But politically,
you can get here by the end of the week.
Go back. Yeah, exactly. Or 2040. I don't care. Right. But obviously, I'm trying to propose something that could actually pass. And I've been studying immigration reform a lot recently, just sort of for myself and for the classes I teach. And I think that we've always made it way too complex. We've always opened it up way too much for poison pills and bad amendments and huge arguments over stuff that, you look at the ways that immigration reform debates have shut down in the past, and it's always other stuff that doesn't get to the core stuff they're trying to fix. So if you narrow it down to this one issue and you just say, here's the law, we're going to debate the date. That's it. That's the only thing that's on the table, is we're going to debate what date the new registry is going to be.
But wouldn't you make driving without a license a bar? Wouldn't that? Or no? Is that too far?
That is too far.
Okay.
The beautiful part about this proposal, and I would encourage you to not try and say something and make it pass, because I believe in the next several years, we're going to have the same sort of hubris that the people who created this problem had when they said, well, we'll let the Supreme Court tell us no, essentially. Mm-hmm. That's their strategy right now.
Yeah.
I don't think the Supreme Court could actually tell Congress no on something like that.
Yeah.
And it's just about political will, and we have to create the political will. But what's beautiful about this is that it keys to the core concept that we're going to observe tomorrow, which is that you can't get taxed without being represented. You can't get disenfranchised, be here, contributing to the society.
Absolutely.
And not have the right to have your say in the political process. And, what the entry fiction and things like that create is this fraudulent thing that people who live here and work here and contribute to society here aren't part of us, and that's what registry would fix.
What if we said that they need at least 3 disabled children? Would that be okay?
God, that's the current law. Right. I was just double checking. Again, we don't have any way to know this for sure, but the estimate is that something like 2/3 of the undocumented population right now has been here for more than 10 years. So would qualify for cancellation, under the current law, which of course is limited to 5,000 visas a year. Registry doesn't have any such limitation.
4,000, right?
4,000, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know why I said 5. I was thinking of diversity visas, I think.
Not even close.
Yeah. So
wait, what were you thinking?
Diversity is 5,000 a year.
I think you made it
50,000. There's 50,000. There's the extra 5,000 set aside for Nicara. It doesn't matter. But I didn't sleep very well tonight.
Diversity lottery program.
I could listen to that all day.
Diversity. It's amazing that he doesn't drink, but
I should.
It's a really, really good proposal, and I think it's important to let people know there's a sense that immigration laws are in the Constitution or something, they're the bedrock,
right? It's immutable
of our laws, and it's just not the case. I remember talking to this guy. Every once in a while, you do a consultation that kind of just sticks in your mind, and he was a single guy. I think he was just over the DACA cutoff age at the time. When it was announced, I think you had to be under 32 or something like that, right? Under 30,
31, I don't know. I think.
Yeah, something like that. So he was just a little too old for DACA. No wife, no kids, just like a regular dude, working and living his life, really good guy, whatever. And he was just like, what the hell? There's nothing for me. I got to have kids and then get arrested by ICE and then, prove that they're going to die if I'm deported or what, all these different things. The ways, when they say do it the right way, well, the right ways are mostly arbitrary and dumb.
Absolutely.
And they leave all these people out. Just remember him being so annoyed that.
Yeah, we all have those conversations so often, and it's hard to watch. And I should mention that this is only one piece of what I think needs to be done. This is not the panacea. It's not going to fix everything, but the most urgent problem in immigration policy right now is the 12 to 16 to million, or who knows how many people at this point who are living in the shadows that we have to do something about. And like I said, 2/3 of those have been here for more than 10 years. And this solution would also cover TPS and DACA, both of which have been here to qualify, very likely since 2012, almost all of them.
Right.
But we need to abolish ICE. We have to fix the reform. We have to fix the asylum system. We have to fix the immigration court system. We have to fix the family visa system. So I'm not proposing this is everything.
Okay. Andrew, are you still there?
Sorry about that.
Somebody's
I am
definitely
indeed.
drinking right now. Who is that?
I think we know.
Okay. Andrew, you tweeted about some FOIAs, and we were talking about it before we started recording. Why don't you tell the folks at home a little bit about what you're working on and what's going on with suicide prevention in ICE custody?
Thanks very much for inviting me to talk about it. So as you know, I, together with a number of partners, have been representing the families of people who died by suicide inside ICE lockups since about May 2017. And as part of those representations, we've done a lot of Freedom of Information Act work that includes requests, it includes FOIA litigation, it includes state-level Public Records Act document productions. So one of the things we wanted to know as we're dealing with the cases of folks for whom ICE failed to prevent their death, their suicide, is how does ICE respond and what's the oversight like of suicide attempts? And as we started, sort of sifting through what these records show and what should be there, we noticed a couple of things that kind of have to be true given the legal landscape. So first, these facilities that ICE runs, which right now are run about 80% by private contractors for profit, these facilities have to pass inspections in order to keep appropriations from Congress. It's a mandate that these facilities are inspected subject to the applicable performance-based national detention standard requirements and their contract, and then there are public facility inspection reports on ICE's website. You can just Google ICE facility inspections and you can see them all. And those ICE facility inspections are typically conducted by an independent contractor called the Nakamoto Group, which has in recent years gotten into it a little bit with Congress and with the Office of Inspector General for DHS, because oddly enough, they have found no deficiencies in a lot of places where OIG came in doing unannounced site inspections and found a lot of deficiencies. Probably the most glaring inadequacy of these inspections is that they're just on paper. They never actually speak with anybody, typically inside the facility. And they're all signaled and planned in advance. So you know if you're the contractor or if you're the agency, what you need to fix before they come. And so there's the inspections, and there's also these significant incident reports, which ICE policies require the contractors and the ERO staff, the enforcement and removal operations staff, to send to the field office directors. Anytime certain things happen, significant incidents or significant event notifications, there are supposed to be report outs by the people in custody so that you can oversee and figure out what's going on. So they fall into 4 categories of significant incidents. One is employee-based significant incidents, and that involves things like shots fired at an employee, shots fired by an employee, use of OC chemical spray or pepper spray, or employees being arrested. So that's one column. The second is like operational significant incidents. So those include things like unaccompanied children. I'm not sure what that category means. Significant seizure or a rescue. The third category is national security significant incidents. And interestingly to me, if you actually look at these significant incident report forms, one of the things under security, which is the third one, the top one is national security, then there's facility disturbance, and then the fourth one from the bottom is demonstrations, which is pretty clearly just a First Amendment list for people who are actually exercising their First Amendment rights. And then the final one is other. And other is escape, suicide attempt, hunger strike, media interest, alien, not non-citizen, injury or death, vehicle incidents, other. I don't know what other is. And then there's like one that says predator and one that says gang related, right? So we knew that suicide attempts should have been reported in significant incident reports to New Orleans field office. So we asked for 4 months of those significant incident reports for attempted suicides by people in custody. There are a lot of beds in the New Orleans field office. There are like over 10 facilities. And we thought we were going to see some of the reports that we've gotten from advocates and frankly, from clients about people who've tried to take their own lives and been stopped by people in custody. So for the grand total of attempted suicides that ICE released to us yesterday in the New Orleans field office, It was, anybody want to take a guess?
0.
You have lost the prices, right? No, it was 2 people. They said attempted suicide in facilities in the New Orleans field office from January 2019 to April 2019. So we said, okay, there's one at Tallahatchie, which is a new CCA facility in Mississippi, and Tutwiler, Mississippi, and then there was one at LaSalle, the detention facility in Gina, Louisiana, which is a GEO facility. Interesting thing about that, when you look at Tallahassee's audit, the one that we were just discussing, Tallahatchie reported no attempted suicides for the same reporting period. That's on ICE's, website. Like, ICE cleared this audit and put it up publicly. So we have here, the report of a man who attempted to take his own life at Tallahatchie, and we have a report that says there was no such incident. The man actually, I believe, had to go to the hospital and was treated. It was an attempted suicide by hanging from a Cameroonian, and he was actually stopped from doing that by other detainees, which is the most common way of suicide prevention in ICE detention. Second one was a man who attempted to slit his left wrist at GEO, and he was taken to the hospital. On that significant incident report, ICE marked down that there were no injuries after saying that he had to go to the hospital for sutures. And so we looked at both of the...
Define injury, really.
Right, exactly. So we looked at these inspections, and as it turns out, the LaSalle inspection, unlike the Tallahatchie inspection, it actually said that there were 4 attempted suicides during that same reporting period. And so what we have is this divergence in some of the most important records that the government is supposed to keep to prevent suicides. And unfortunately, this has been consistent with our findings in individual case investigations. I'll give you just 2 from this year. So the first is ICE's detainee death report that it is required to post online per congressional appropriations requirements within 90 days of any in-custody death. And what Congress meant when it passed this appropriations rider was that ICE's normal detainee death reports were supposed to be completed and published to Congress within 90 days. What we discovered through representing Roxana Hernandez's family with Transgender Law Center and other partners was that ICE actually just created these fake dummy detainee death reports that are not the things that Congress was talking about, and they're just posting them. And it's mostly 4 pages with 2 pages of immigration and criminal history, a couple sentences about what caused the death, and then ICE really cares about people in its custody. We spend, billions of dollars on healthcare each year. So we started looking at the records that we've been getting in the detention kills cases that we've been handling and comparing them against the death reports. And the most recent one, which all credit goes to the attorneys at Centro Legal de la Raza in the Bay Area, that's Trevor, Priya, Lisa, and Elena, were able to get from various sources the medical records of Chuang An, who died. He's a 74-year-old Korean man who died by suicide while in medical isolation at Mesa Verde in California, which is a GEO facility. He had been brought back from the hospital after potentially testing for COVID. It's notable, actually, that this is a 74-year-old man with a number of comorbidities that ICE continued to detain. And he had some criminal history, but this is in violation of Freiheit and in violation of all good sense. So we looked at the detainee death report, and it said on some days when we knew he had mental health exams, it said the mental health exam was, quote, essentially normal. What it didn't say was during that mental health exam, he told the examiner that he intended on committing suicide and that he had tried it in the past. So ICE essentially tried to tell Congress and the public that he had an essentially normal mental health exam during which he told them he was going to commit suicide and then did. So we pointed that out, and ICE changed the detainee death report, but did not notify anyone of the change.
So
the second example of this, sorry, I can pause there if you want.
Well, I'm just curious, what's in it for them? Why would they need to lie about this stuff? I mean, why not just tell the truth?
Well, when you have these detainee death reports, they're part of an appropriations effort that goes along with some oversight. And as we know, this agency is completely allergic to sort of independent oversight. Sunlight will actually disinfect and kill a lot of these practices. And so by publicly acknowledging the obvious mistakes that were made, for instance, not putting this man on suicide watch as required by policy, not escalating his case to a mental health treatment provider who could de-escalate and help him get some care, ICE would have to admit that they were breaking their rules and their contractors broke their rules, which is the thing that they will never do. And so there's an incentive here, both governing incentive and financial incentive, because Really, what ICE would have to do in order to admit the failures is to blame it on their contractor, in this case, GEO, and its medical people and the contractors that they've hired to do medical. And by doing that, it would undermine the entire system because, again, 80% of immigration detention beds at this point are under contract for profit by private companies. The second instance, though, is all ICE. It's not a contractor's fault. That was the death of Ben Owen. He's a British man who has a U.S. citizen wife and child, and he died in a jail in Baker County, Florida by suicide in January after having been in custody in Daytona Beach. ICE said in its detainee death report that Mr. Owen had stayed past December 10th, 2019 on an O2 non-immigrant visa. And so he stayed here without authorization. What ICE did not tell Congress in this congressionally mandated report or the public is that he actually filed an adjustment of status application, and his wife filed a petition for alien relative because they were married and she could petition for him. And that actually put him in a period of stay authorized by the Attorney General. In other words, there was no reason for him to go into custody because he was actually not going to be deportable. He was going to be able to adjust. And prior to this regime, the folks who were in a period of stay authorized by the Attorney General, or I've learned it's called an apasabog, they would not be detained. They would not be arrested. And ICE, I think, neglected to inform Congress and the public that this guy actually had done exactly what we would require of him, which was to file papers and adjust your status when your visa runs out. But they didn't. And it's because these death reports are about making the person who died look like they're to blame.
Well, that's terrible. But it's good that there's lawyers like you guys who are, digging through this stuff and trying to bring some sunlight to the situation. Is there anything that people can do about it? Because people, I think sometimes, especially now, are feeling pretty powerless, staying at home all day. So, what can people do to, bring awareness to this situation?
Yeah, I think the first thing to remember is that none of these things happen, just like USCIS, none of these things happen without government funding or funding from other people. And so, guess who constitutionally is authorized to give that funding? It's your elected representatives. And so even if it's just taking 5 minutes to call an elected official's office, both in DC and if you can, in your local office, and express your concern about this and ask, what is Congressperson this doing about these issues? What it does is it actually, and then maybe getting 2 or 3 people who would do this as well, getting 2 or 3 people to do the same thing. What it does is it puts this on the radar of everybody, and it makes the people who are responsible for oversight and appropriations held accountable. Yeah. After BuzzFeed and Hamid, who you've spoken with on the podcast, published in December an article about some internal documents governing the complete negligence and abuse that happened for people who had died and gotten other horrible medical outcomes in ICE custody. That article was published in December. The House Government Oversight Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, so that's Chairman Raskin, opened an investigation. And, if you wanted to reach out to Chairman Raskin's office and say thank you for that and encourage other members of that subcommittee to fulsomely investigate and use their subpoena power, that's something that could be moving the needle. But mostly, I think, I've said before on your podcast, I've said it elsewhere, I think talking to a person in detention or communicating with people who have recently experienced that, having an individual experience with someone who's lived through this is the most powerful sort of organizing tool that a lot of people who don't do what we do every day are ever going to have. And there's a lot of ways to do that. One is by, getting on Freedom for Immigrants' visitation list. Another is by, thinking about what are your local campaigns doing to stop new ICE detention centers and cooperation agreements from going into effect. Because as we know, a lot of this stuff is local and we actually have the ability to move the needle at the local level. So those are some ideas. Also wear a mask.
Well, one thing that people who don't listen very much or might not be familiar is to understand about the people that are in ICE detention. There are people who may have criminal records in ICE detention, but there's no one that is being detained by ICE that is serving a criminal sentence. So they may have served their criminal sentence and been done with it and then taken into ICE custody. But probably, I would dare say, the vast majority, the first time they've ever been in a prison or jail is when they've been detained by ICE. When you start to look at it that way, I want everyone to ask themselves, like, do we really need these facilities? And certainly, do we really need the extent of the facilities that we have? I mean, we have a good friend who was eventually deported to Peru, and he was detained by ICE for, I think, 3 to 4 months. And this was like 4 or 5 years ago before we could get him out. He had a reinstated removal order. So we were able to get him out during the Obama years. And he was in there for 3 or 4 months. And then, we kept extending his stay of removal. And eventually I said, look, we're not going to do it anymore. So he packed up and he went to Peru because he said, the last thing I want to do is go back into detention. And the detention facility he was in, I mean, he had freedom of movement. He was like cooking there. He's a cook by trade. So he was busy, but he said it was, even though it wasn't like, these maximum security prisons that you'll see that we have that look horrendous. He just said it was awful because that's the first time he's ever been detained. It was very traumatic for him. And it almost cost them their house, almost cost him his business. And it was really, really just unnecessary. And when you look at something that is so costly, so traumatic, so unnecessary, and then you look at all the horrible things that happen, like Andrew's been talking about, everyone should really question, why do we need it? And there's a whole segment of the population that the only reason they really like it is because it punishes immigrants. Mm-hmm. And that's not a valid reason, especially for civil detention.
I have a question actually for Andrew. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let me pin, before your question, just let me pin something on the back of what Matthew said, which is, I think, in this moment, I've been thinking a lot about how people who never have had contact with the carceral system or who've had no contact with courts or people who've been locked up, we actually, have the opportunity for people now to understand what it's like to have your personal safety and health and livelihood threatened by completely arbitrary and frankly just painfully dumb government irresponsibility and lying, and that is what we have seen and why more than 125,000 people are dead in this country. And if we have learned anything from COVID, it's that you actually have to look at the reality and not just the rhetoric. The rhetoric on immigration detention is we have these standards, we have these audits, we have these rules in place, and we make sure that everybody complies. We really care about everybody inside. These records are about the reality, just like the COVID records are about the reality. And, as we try and bring these records out and help people understand, you're not so different than the person whose freedom, safety, when they go to the bathroom, when they pray, when they sleep, when they eat is all controlled by people who have a profit interest and people who have political interest in keeping you locked up. So I think we actually have, as we were all locked in our homes for good reason. We have a way to empathize in ways that I don't know that we did before. Sorry to step on your question, Matt.
Oh, no, that goes right to my question. I was going to say this whole thing really is a testament to the Freedom of Information Act and to what happens if you put the work in. And obviously, in detention kills and journalists like Ahmad doing amazing work getting this stuff out because they're never going to voluntarily tell us any of this. And if anything, as we know, as you've said, they're going to do whatever they can to spin or lie or even just ignore this stuff. But just because I think that it is actually one way that people might be able to help or even maybe people might be interested. If you could speak to how you got these documents, the process it took, if you had to do any litigation, or generally speaking, how hard it is to get some of this stuff out of ICE.
Sure. So I'm actually an evangelist for the Freedom of Information Act. I think it's the lifeblood of American democracy, and I think that everybody should just wake up and file a FOIA if we all could. It's sort of hard, though, because you request these things, and then the government gaslights you and tries to convince you that you've not described them adequately or that you've sent them to the wrong place. And then they try and just wait you out by making these processing times really punitive and lengthy through a combination of underfunding the FOIA offices and then just having inadequate systems in place to timely respond. So every time Congress has amended the Freedom of Information Act since 1974, which is, a handful, they've imposed time limits and they've imposed penalties for violating those time limits. It's one of the only laws where you can sue the federal government, you can haul them into court. And the only one that I can actually think of other than this is habeas, right? Where not, like, you can actually sue the federal government, and then it's their burden to justify they've complied with the law. And they get very little deference. There's very little committed to their discretion as to how they do the search and how they do the productions. And so what we do is, we think about what is the end result record that we want to see, and how would we prove the truth of something through government documents. And if you're not a lawyer, it's going to sound really wonky, and you could just ask a question and see if there's any record pertaining to this. And you got to make sure you direct it correctly, but that's basically it. But the other beautiful thing about FOIA, I'm going to do like an hour-long thing about this next week, so I'm kind of in that mode, but is like, they're supposed to read your request as broadly as you can to promote the interests of the act, which are transparency, accountability, and letting citizens know what their government's up to. Also, you don't have to be a citizen to file a FOIA request. I was just reading Antonin Scalia's lamenting from 1982, before he was a judge, article called "The Freedom of Information Has No Close," and it was published in the American Enterprise Institute Journal on Government and Society. One of the things he hated was that citizens didn't have to have a need to know in order to get information about what's happening. And so just for these documents, what we did is we looked at some system of records notices, which are ways that the government is required to notify you about what it's using to do the business of government. And we look at some privacy impact assessments, which is another way of figuring that out. And they're all published on the agency's websites in their FOIA reading room, which is also required by the Act. We said, okay, we think that we can prove that ICE is failing to prevent suicides in these ways by getting these documents and comparing them against these others. And so we built kind of the rules of the road in our theoretical conception. And then we decided, let's not try and get this for 5 years for every detention facility in the country. Let's try and do it really targeted, just do a really targeted period. 4 months, that's enough. One field office, that's enough. So we'll get a statistically significant sample, and we'll get, enough records to see where we are. We filed that in May of 2019. Government responded pretty promptly and said, we don't have any of these records. So we appealed in July of 2019 to ICE's FOIA office. I got these documents yesterday. The FOIA says that the agency has to make records promptly available to the requester. And that's just not happening. So it's really hard. But if you file enough requests and if you target them, you learn how to, decide, do you want to do a broad one or a narrow one? Can you set a date range? Can you figure out where you think they should search and let them know that? And you're patient and diligent and you don't give up, you can actually get some really interesting stuff. And I think Matthew Hoppeck and other folks who just run circles around DOJ with FOIA are like perfect examples of that.
The recreational FOIA community.
That's right.
Indeed. AKA the guardians of democracy.
Absolutely. No, it's essential stuff. So none of this had to go to litigation?
This one didn't. We are still litigating. I was laughing this morning because I was just typing an email up to a client. The first in-custody death case that I worked, the man died, Gene Jimenez. He was a dreamer who had valid DACA status at the time that he was arrested by ICE. And he had previously come into contact with ICE 4 times. And then the only thing that changed was who the president was. And so they arrested him, they took him to Stewart, and he ended up ending his life after being in prolonged solitary confinement, despite him telling them he was going to do that and telling them that the voices in his head were telling him to do it, and them documenting that. He actually used the detention reporting information line that you can just press a button inside your cell and get somebody in DC. And they notified CRCL that he wasn't getting his medication. And it turns out he wasn't. They were underdosing him. So we started that FOIA process shortly after getting retained in May 2017. And we filed our first request in July of 2017. We have a status conference in litigation in DC on that coming next week, because the agency, we sued OIG, CRCL, and ICE. And after providing a number of really helpful records and information that showed us exactly all the failures, and, the officer who worked for the private company who falsified the logs because it was understaffed and he didn't have time to do all of his work, he was recommended for prosecution by OIG to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Nice. So we found out a lot of interesting things, but that ICE has never admitted. We also found out that they knew within hours that having one licensed clinical social worker for a population of 1,920 people was, quote, not doable. And then they gaslit us and said that they provided adequate care and, all this. But that case is still in litigation, and we're going to have to file a motion for summary judgment because the government has told us that they cannot estimate the date on which they will complete their productions.
Well, keep up the good work, and thanks everybody for coming on today. I got to get going here, but Really, really interesting stuff. And I'm grateful for all you smart lawyers out there who I can listen to and learn from. So,
and me as well.
Yeah, all the smart lawyers. And then, Matthew, I mean, I'm not sure about grateful, but, you exist and you're there. And so that's good.
Let me just give a little epilogue to the Castro Tum story.
Oh, yeah.
As our regular listeners know, I stood in for Mr. Castro Tum in immigration court as a friend of the court. And a trial attorney who was, for lack of a better word, prosecuting the case and was likely the one who had appealed the administrative closure by Judge Morley. He is now the new judge, immigration judge in the Philadelphia Immigration Court. So we're all very excited
Yeah,
for that. So yeah, things are looking up.
Cool. Great. All right, guys. Well, let's
so big shout out, Joe.
Happy birthday, America, and have a good weekend, everybody. And we'll do this again soon. All right.
Anytime. Thanks.
Thank you very much.